33 Immortals is one of those games that when I first saw back at one of those Game Awards show when it got revealed, I can't remember which one, I immediately thought to myself, how the hell has no one thought of this yet? A few days ago on January 28th, the game went into open beta and is going on until February 7th. And I played it for a few hours last night when I should have been sleeping, but I kind of want to talk about my first impressions and how I feel about the game. Short answer is, the game is dope as hell, but stick around if you want to hear me go into it a little bit deeper. Let's get into it. First and foremost, the game is made by the same developers as Spiritfarer, and if you've ever played that game, you know how much of a banger that is. But this one is different. It's an action roguelite. I know, hold on, hold your horses. But it shares the same skeleton of room-clearing action roguelikes, such as Hades, Enter the Gungeon, Tiny Rogues, etc., with a really unique twist where you play with 32 other players, and you're basically going across 3 different larger maps, and within each of those larger maps, there's smaller arenas called torture chambers. When you first jump in, the game kind of throws the narrative at you really quickly, and then it gives you a tutorial, and then after that it kind of throws you right into the thick of everything, with the basic premise being that you play a damned soul and you're rebelling against God's final judgment. Crazy, I know. You basically fight hella monsters, defeat what are essentially raid bosses, and then eventually end up fighting God himself. Like I mentioned earlier, there are 3 main maps, and within each of those there are multiple torture chambers, of which you can have up to 6 people in a quote party, where you can fight all the enemies inside. You beat them, you get some rewards, you come out, and then if you beat enough rooms, then you can do the Ascension battle, and then after the Ascension battle, you can go fight the boss of that map. And of course, there are multiple types of enemies, with melee enemies, ranged enemies, smaller, elite enemies, and then mini bosses, I believe. Currently, there are 4 main classes or weapon types. You have a sword, dual daggers, bow, and a staff. All of these have unique attacks, charge attacks, special, and what they call a co-op strike. These co-op strikes are basically what the entire combat loop revolves around, and is kind of the way you turn the tide in a lot of battles. They operate in 2 significant ways. One is when you're out in the overworld and you're attacking monsters on the field and someone else is attacking the same monster as you, there's a little meter that builds up and it gives you an increased crit chance. At the same time, the more damage you do, you have a meter for your co-op strike, and once that meter is full, that's when you can use that ability. For example, the sword gives the player and 2 other allies a shield. The daggers, I believe, give increased crit chance to 2 other allies. The staff creates a slowing cloud in a certain area, and then the bow creates a rain of arrows. As they are now, the abilities are kind of cool, but I feel like they're going to need eventually some kind of variation, or maybe some other abilities that these characters can have. Hopefully when you upgrade them, they can have better abilities or more interesting abilities, but they're still pretty useful in a fight. Obviously, you can't expect to really win a lot of hard fights without them. Earlier I mentioned that there's rewards for finishing these torture chambers, and there's not really loot, but there is like perks, relics you can pick up during the run, and other currency that are important for buying stuff within the run. And for me, one of the things I can't live without when there's a shared world with co-op players is shared loot, and this game doesn't have that. You have your own loot that's local to you. And the funny thing is, I don't think the game really says that up front, but I feel like some players might not know that, and they're trying to scramble to collect everything before someone else does. Like I said earlier, I think the tutorial does well enough, but there are some details that I feel like it leaves out, and I don't know if it was just me, but the controls that it shows on the screen and tells you how to do certain things, I feel like it's way off. Like I'm trying to press certain buttons that it says, but it's not those buttons. It's not really a deal breaker, but it is something that I noticed when I was interacting with the in-game shrines, of which there are 3 different types that provide different functions, like healing, upgrading your base stats, which is hugely important, by the way, don't sleep on that, and reviving other players, which is also important. It is fun fighting with other people and having like a shared goal, but the fights themselves can be a bit chaotic, with visibility sometimes becoming a slight issue. Also, there is some jank, like the combat and the movement feels a bit stiff, especially when it comes to the dash. I feel like the cooldown on the dash is a little long, although you can reduce it with relics, but this could also be due to the online nature and, you know, with ping and latency and things like that being an issue. Despite that, I do have a lot of fun personally playing the bow and the dual daggers class. With the bow, you can shoot the arrows and then you can recall them, and they do damage both after you shoot them and as you recall them. And then obviously you have the rain of arrows ability that I mentioned earlier, and with the dual daggers, you have a fast attack speed, and you have an ability that basically is a second dodge, but it also has an attack at the end that does insane damage. So you're basically like a burst damage class, which makes sense for the build. Now, as far as the bosses go, I'll just tell you up front that they're hard as hell. They have massive health pools, they have multiple phases, they have minions that spawn, they have hazard in the terrain, and you have to figure out the moveset so you can dash accordingly and get out of the way. All the while, if people die, you have to make sure you revive them, or else they'll permanently be gone from the fight, and then you'll be down a few people or a handful of people. In my case, at one point, I was the last of 2 people, and then of course, we couldn't fight the boss because it was just 2 of us, and we're just tiny little fleas compared to the boss. I don't have any footage of the boss because I didn't want to spoil it for anybody when they first get into it, even though I only fought the first one so far, but you'll see what I'm talking about. There's also no voice or text chat, so it's kind of hard to coordinate. You kind of just have to to expect or hope that the group you're with is going to do what you want them to do or do what is the right thing to do. Groups might be fighting mobs for resources, heading toward torture chambers, or opening chests, etc. And you really don't want to be caught alone because a lot of these enemies have so much health, and you get some bonuses when you're fighting with other people anyway, so there's a lot of incentive to do so. I mentioned before that there's chests you can open for more resources and basically bonus currency so that you can upgrade your character or buy useful things at shrines, and you also sometimes need a key to unlock these chests, which can give you perks, which are basically new abilities or new passive abilities, and also you can get in-game relics, which are basically just more passives that buff your character. I mentioned visibility being an issue earlier, and this is kind of related, but there has been a few times where some random stuff is just happening on the screen, everything is going crazy, and I had no idea what was going on, and it turns out that I think periodically throughout the map, sometimes the map just starts attacking you, like there's fireballs that spawn and you have to dodge them, or some other things come on the screen that you just have to avoid or else you'll take massive damage. And in this game, you take so much damage from everything, basically. I want to reiterate that the most important thing is to kill enough mobs to farm the currency called dust, so you can buy base stat upgrades to make yourself stronger. You can also get some perks, which I recommend getting, so that way when you come back to the hub, you can equip those and also make yourself stronger that way. Also, as with most action games or action RPGs, playing the ranged classes are usually the safer way and the easiest way to stay alive and output damage compared to the melee. So like in this case with the bow or the staff, although I feel like the bow does more damage and the staff kind of needs a little bit of a buff. And I mentioned it a little bit briefly earlier, but there's also a pretty cool hub area with a bunch of different NPCs where you can look at your perks, you can change cosmetics, you can look at the compendium, which has all of the information for the game if you forgot something that the game told you. And then also there's a training area where you can practice some of the different weapon abilities, and you even get some rewards for completing them for the first time. It's pretty cool. The last thing I want to mention is that there is also daily challenges, and there's some basic ones like kill 100 enemies total, or use a certain ability this many times, or kill the boss this many times, or something like that, which you can get rewards for when you complete a certain amount of them. And then there's also what they call feats, which have their own categories, which are separate from the daily challenges, but also slightly more complex or slightly more specific. And if you do enough feats, they're actually tied to the part of the end game that is not available in this version of the game, but if you do enough feats, you basically get an immortal crown where you get to actually challenge God himself. That's the ultimate end goal of this entire game. On top of that, I believe as you do more feats, that's how you unlock perk slots, because at the beginning you can only put one perk, but eventually you'll be able to put multiple so you can make a certain build, or so you can have a certain level of survivability. Overall, I want to say that I am enjoying my time with it. It's pretty dope. I think it has a great foundation, but hopefully they iron out some of the kinks. Like I said earlier, it does feel kind of stiff. There are some things that I think might need more variety if this is going to be a long-term game where people keep playing it, like more mechanics, more systems, because I can see it getting repetitive quicker than you would want it to. But aside from that, the art style is really distinct and I would say painterly in a way. It's really dope. The music is super fitting and the sound design is pretty good. And the last thing is that the narrative is practically non-existent. I mean, in the beginning there was a cutscene and you get some story and some context, but other than that, it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty minimal. Anyway, if you watched all the way to the end, I truly appreciate it. I would also appreciate it if you left a comment, subscribe, like the video, and let me know if you played the game or if you plan on playing it. I don't know if there's parties yet, but that is a feature, so you know, it would be cool to try to play with people at some point, if not right now during the open beta, at some point down the line when the game actually comes out. That's it for now. Peace out, y'all, and I'll see you in the next video.